Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So first off, want to say I will be back tomorrow. So when I have you for social studies, please show up to the live meet. Usual SS Panio. This is my last day of parental leave. Um, so yeah, I think I see most of the classes first period and maybe 8A1 fourth period, I believe. So wherever I see you on the schedule, I will meet you live, and we get back into more of a routine. This is also the last day of World War One. You guys have seen how horrific this war has been. Now we are going to get into the treaty that ended the war. You're going to see, if you're looking at the focus question, why was the Treaty of Versailles and the end of World War One so controversial? It is ultimately, I don't even want to be, I'm not even being biased. Like, historians will say this is one of the worst treaties of all time, because as you're about to learn, this treaty kind of indirectly leads to World War II. It doesn't really make things better. It actually causes a lot bigger problems that we're going to have to deal with as a world in a couple of decades. So this is not a great treaty. We're going to look at it under the lens of it not being a great treaty. I guess there's always two sides to everything. But in terms of what you need to know for the Regents, we got to look at more of the negative side of it. Okay, why was the Treaty of Versailles and the end of World War I so controversial? Okay, so that's your focus question. You could pause the video. And now we're going to go through and we're going to mix between the reading and the video so you can follow along with the reading here. We're going to first start with the first page just to kind of get the this on the left here. Now, we should already know the background. We should kind of already know at this point in time, but let's just go through it. So the First World War has been fought for 4 years, when on November 11th, 1918, Germany and the Allies signed an armistice. The Allies soon gathered to discuss the peace treaty when they would sign, but Germany and Austria-Hungary weren't invited. So that is kind of a weird thing. Even when a country loses a war, they're generally allowed to come and at least present their beliefs on what a fair peace treaty would be. This is not that at all. Okay, Germany and Austria-Hungary were not invited. They were not allowed to really say anything on their behalf. And ultimately, the peace treaty was decided by the major countries of the Allied powers. And you're going to see how this is a problem. Now, remember, when some wars end with a surrender, but this wasn't a surrender. This was starting with an armistice, and then eventually now we're looking at a final treaty, but the treaty is not going to be very good. Okay. Instead, they were only allowed to present a large response, which was largely ignored. Instead, terms were drawn up mainly by the big three: British Prime Minister Lloyd George, French Prime Minister Francis Clemenceau, and U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. Okay. So let's look at the American perspective first and foremost. So Woodrow Wilson, our president at this time, comes up with a plan that he wants to present, and he brings this plan with him, okay, over to the treaty to kind of discuss ways to keep our country and the world safe. So he wanted a fair and lasting peace and had a written plan when he came there. This written plan is better known as the 14 points. We're about to learn what those are to achieve this. He wanted the armed forces of all nations reduced, not just the losers, and the League of Nations created to ensure peace. Okay? Francis Clemenceau, okay, he was the guy that was the loudest in the room, meaning the guy that had the most influence, and we'll kind of discuss why. First off, you should remember most of World War I was fought in France. So he generally does not like at all the Germans, okay, because a lot of Germany was really messing around, okay, not doing the right thing, and they didn't like him for that. They didn't like Germany for that. So he's going to have the strongest opinion in the room. And he wanted Germany to pay dearly for the war, including being stripped of land, industry, and their armed forces. Okay, so we'll talk about what that looks like. He also wanted heavy reparations, which we'll talk about what that means in a second. But basically, he wanted to stick it to Germany for basically, fighting a lot of World War I in his land. So he did not like Germany very much, and France did not like Germany very much. And the last one, Lloyd George, while he personally agreed with Wilson, he thought Wilson's plan was better than Francis Clemenceau. He was affected by public opinion in Britain, which agreed more with Clemenceau. A lot of people in Great Britain didn't like Germany as well, and didn't like what Germany was doing in World War One with the chemical warfare. So you know what? He sided with Francis Clemenceau. So even though Wilson kind of had maybe more of the what's the word? Even though he had a more peaceful approach, Francis Clemenceau was the loudest in the room. He was able to sway Lloyd George, and you could see there's three of them. So when two was against one, those two people kind of get more what they want, and that's what happened here. Okay, but before we go into actually the Treaty of Versailles, I think it's important to look at what Wilson's 14 points were. You have two things you're going to look at. Okay, we're going to look at the notes, but when you get to the reading, it may be good to use this. I'm sorry, when you get to the questions, it may be good to use this reading. Now we will, okay, we will use the notes, but you can use this as well. Okay, we're not going to go through this one together, but we will go through this here. Okay, so here are your notes. You have 3 slides today. Here we go. So Woodrow Wilson was still the president at the end of World War One. At the end of the war, he came up with his 14 points plan. So this is his written proposal. Okay, and I kind of find it funny because students often ask me, can I just instead of taking notes or writing a paragraph, can I just bullet point? And usually my answer, after this point would be, well, if Woodrow Wilson could do it, you could do it too. All right, if it's a little bit of a social studies joke, basically meaning like he just literally wrote down 14 bullet points on this main goal. His main goal was a plan to prevent another world war from ever happening again and to solve international problems peacefully. So basically, this 14 points were 14 bullet points describing, in his opinion, ways to prevent another world war. And some of them are very logical and some of them make a lot of sense. So let's just go through some of them here. So let's take a look at the second one, freedom of the seas. Remember, the United States got involved big reason why the United States got involved was the unrestricted submarine warfare when they sunk the Lusitania. That kind of got the United States public opinion involved. And then when the Zimmermann Telegram come out and Germany said that they were going to return to unrestricted submarine warfare and basically have no freedom of the seas, that was a big reason why America got involved. Okay. The fourth one, reduction of armaments. Remember, one of the major causes of World War I as a whole was militarism. Okay, people had big militaries, they had a lot of weapons. Okay, but at this point in time, we need to reduce the amount of military. We need to have less weapons. We need to have less bombs, and we need to make sure that militarism isn't a major thing unless there is a war. Now, if a war breaks out, you want to build up your military. That's completely fine. But you shouldn't have a big military in times of peace. Okay. Let's take a look at another one. 5. So like the ones I'm not saying. 3. One, you should say open diplomacy. Diplomacy means trying to work things out peacefully, which is very good. Like 6, 7, 8, 9. Those are all world history things. I would like to mention Austria-Hungary was an imperial country, and after this war, Woodrow Wilson was saying that caused a lot of the problems with Serbia. Okay, with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, so he'd like to break that up. All right. But the only one you really need to know for the Regents is point 14. Okay. Point 14 was something called the creation of an association or a League of Nations. Okay. Now, let's go over what a League of Nations is. Okay. The most important thing about a League of Nations is it really has never been done before. But Wilson basically says this: we need an organization where diplomats and ambassadors from different countries can meet in one central spot and discuss their problems. Okay, I sometimes joke like a big world therapy session. Okay, a huge reason why World War I breaks out is no countries are communicating. They're constantly fighting over land. They're constantly fighting over different areas of the world. And that caused World War I. Okay, if countries are constantly fighting for different areas of the world, that's going to lead to some problems. We know a big problem with imperialism is sometimes it leads to conflict and wars. And Woodrow Wilson's response to that would be like, we need to get in a place, okay, we'll call it the League of Nations, and we need to meet and we need to discuss and we need to work things out peacefully. All right. Now, The League of Nations ultimately was a failure because the goal of the League of Nations was to prevent another world war. And you don't have to be an expert in American history to realize that there was a World War II eventually. So the main goal of the League of Nations was a little bit of a failure. We'll talk about some reasons why. Okay, you should definitely write down the important regions fact that is specifically for you guys. Okay, so if you need to pause the video, please do. Although the United States was responsible for creating the League of Nations, it never joined. That's kind of weird, right? It's like if you build a business, but then don't be a part of the company. Okay, that's like kind of weird. But this is true, and we'll look at why America never joins the League of Nations despite creating it. So, the League of Nations will go into effect. Okay, it was a failure, but it ultimately led to the United Nations, which was a lot more successful, which came after World War II and still exists today. I'm not saying the United Nations is perfect; it does have some problems, but there hasn't been a World War III, so it has been successful in stopping its ultimate goal of preventing another world war, where the League of Nations was not. All right. And this was really spearheaded by Wilson's 14 points and really a major way that America, again, just proves that it's a world power. We're now a big reason why World War I was won by the Allies. We're now on a world stage creating a world organization, basically, where countries can go send diplomats to meet. That's pretty cool. All right. But you'll see why America doesn't join soon. So now let's talk about the dreaded Treaty of Versailles. Okay, let's talk about the dreaded Treaty of Versailles. So before the notes, we're going to head back to the reading. Okay, before the notes, we're going to head back to the reading. Let me get to the spot here. All right, now we're going to get a general sense of why the Treaty of Versailles was so bad. Okay, we're going to look at some of the terms of the war, and then you can kind of get a sense of, yeah, like this may cause some future problems. Okay, so first off, we're not going to read them all. Okay, I'm just gonna pick some of the big ones. So try and listen to me. My mouse, if you can see my mouse, I'm not even sure if you can. We're gonna start with the territory. Okay, we're gonna look at bullet points 1, 4, and 6. Okay, for this Treaty of Versailles, here are some of the terms that were created. So number 1, the Alsace-Lorraine, which was captured by Germany in 1870, was returned to France. Okay, so territory that Germany had has now been lost. Okay, and been given up to the allied country France. The fourth one, all German and Turkish colonies. Okay, remember Turkey was the Ottoman Empire, were taken away and put under allied control. So if you had a colony, if Germany was imperial in, let's say, in Africa, they were gone. They lost their territory. All right, and we already talked about the sixth one. Austria-Hungary was split up and Yugoslavia was created. Now Yugoslavia doesn't even exist today anymore. There's some different smaller countries, but that area in the Balkan area has been a little bit of a hotbed for some problems over the last 100 years. And this is in large part to this treaty, which didn't really help solve any problems. It just like split up these countries and like left these countries to have some pretty, rough times. Okay. So territories. Overall, Germany is losing its territory from this. The arms. Okay, arms is another word for weapons. So let's start with the second one. The German army was cut to 100,000 men. Guys and girls, that's nothing. 100,000 men is nothing. All right, they have basically no military, at least no military manpower. The fourth one, the German Navy was cut to 36 ships and no submarines. Remember, the submarines were a huge cause for problem for a lot of the Allied countries, so they got rid of them all in Germany. Okay, and 36 ships. I mean, that's not going to defend anything. Okay, we have thousands upon thousands of ships in the United States to protect us. All right, 36 is practically nothing. The fifth one, Germany was banned from having an air force. You will see how important in World War II the Air Force is in fighting World War II. And Germany has no Air Force. Okay, so their territory, now again, you're kind of getting the sense. Germany is the major target. Now, you may say, Mr. Panio, Germany wasn't the only country that fought in this war. They weren't the only central power. They weren't the ones who even started the war. Okay, but the Germany World War I was by far the strongest central power, so they get most of the blame. Whether that's right or wrong is up for debate, but you could definitely say because they were the strongest country, that's why they got most of the blame. All right. This is a huge problem. Huge problem. Reparations and guilt. in the war guilt clause, there was a clause added to the treaty where basically Germany has to accept total blame. Again, they're not the only country, but they have to accept total blame for the war. Now, generally, when you lose a war, you're responsible for the damages. Now, Woodrow Wilson basically is like, there's no way Germany can afford. Okay, there's no way Germany can afford paying for this war. It's a world war. It's way too expensive. But the Treaty of Versailles basically says Germany is responsible for paying reparations, okay, which is another term for large sums of money that Germany has to pay to the Allied countries. In this reparations world war guilt clause, the German economy becomes basically worthless. It goes from being one of the richest countries in the world to probably the poorest country. There's a famous story where the German marks, that's like their US dollar, like bread used to cost like 5 German marks. Okay, after the reparations of war guilt clause, it costs like 1 million German marks for a piece of bread, a loaf of bread. Went from 5 to 1 million. Okay, it's like in crazy. Okay, and we'll talk about why that happens a little bit later on with inflation, but we'll get there. We already know about the League of Nations. Some results you can kind of read through. Let's take a look at all of them here. So the first one, the map of Europe was redrawn with consequences which, especially in the Balkans, that's that Yugoslavia area, okay, where Serbia, Czech Republic, Slovakia are. Okay, that kind of area has left some big problems. All right. Numerous countries were left with large minority groups. There were 3.5 million Germans in Czechoslovakia alone. So you had a lot of German people in countries that they didn't want to be a part of. That could led to some problems. The League of Nations was fatally weakened without the United States and its army to enforce decisions. So watch what happens when the United States doesn't join the League of Nations. That's a big reason why World War II takes place. And of course, many Germans felt unfairly treated after they all had signed an armistice, which was a ceasefire, not a unilateral surrender. This wasn't like the Confederates surrendering to the Union and they had to come aboard. Okay, this is supposed to be a fair peace treaty. And the Allies has indeed occupied into Germany. Okay, so let's go over a couple things. We got 2 more slides and then we'll be done. All right, so first let's go through the Regents questions here. I'm sorry about that. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points were intended to do what? All right, they dangle number 4 in front of you to get it confused with the Treaty of Versailles, but he didn't want to punish Germany. He just wanted to, 3, prevent international tensions from leading to war. One goal for a lasting peace that Woodrow Wilson including in his 14 points. Okay, again, really the only thing you have to remember from the 14 points was establishing a League of Nations, at least in terms of the regions. Okay, so number 1. Okay, so this is just an overall summary of the Treaty of Versailles. So this is what the Treaty of Versailles does. The Treaty of Versailles, of course, ends World War I. So I guess we could say that is the good thing. Okay, it does end the deadliest war in world history at the time. Up until World War II, this was the deadliest war in world history. And of course, declared victory for the Allied powers. Therefore, they came up with more of the terms for the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, we already kind of know this, so you could pause the video and write this down. The Allied nations blamed Germany for the entire war and forced Germany to pay reparations, okay, payment for war crimes and damages, disarm, take away their weapons, take away some of their territories, and they split Germany into some smaller countries after they lost some of their territory. So this is the stuff we already know. You just probably should write this down so you have a good set of notes on this. Now, the next thing I'm going to say is going to be more for the people that have maybe more of an understanding of history than some students. I'm going to kind of say this outright. A huge reason why eventually Germany will get Adolf Hitler to go in charge is because of the Treaty of Versailles and World War I. So for those that don't know, obviously Germany becomes a major country that we are going to be fighting against in World War II again. This is in large part to Adolf Hitler. Okay, the 1920s for Germany were a disaster. Okay, they're extremely poor. They have like no money. Okay, they have no military might. And they have like no pride. Okay, it was like embarrassing to be German at this time. When you have a group of people that are very embarrassed to be a part of a country, okay, when they feel bad, they feel negative, All right, they start listening to people who have a lot more radical or extreme ideas. So when a guy like Adolf Hitler comes around and starts, basically saying, I'm oversimplifying this, you'll see how he comes into power, but he starts saying, like, it's not Germany's fault that we're struggling. It's not Germany's fault that we're poor. It's not Germany's fault that we're weak. It's the Treaty of Versailles' fault. It's the Allied powers' fault. It's Britain's fault. It's America's fault. And when a person feels or a country feels like they're a victim, and someone comes along and says they could pretty much fix everything for them, people start to listen. Okay, if someone says they're going to start doing good things and making life better, even if they're not maybe the best person, you sometimes might listen. And that's what a lot of people of Germany started to do because this guy said he was going to fix everything. And here's the worst part, I guess. When he came into power in Germany, he really did start to fix things for Germany. Germany did very well under Adolf Hitler for a short time. Okay. So understand it's because Germany got so weak and it's because of the Treaty of Versailles they got so weak. You could pretty much say the Treaty of Versailles was kind of indirectly led to the rise of Adolf Hitler. Now, if you don't really know who Adolf Hitler is, it's okay. If you're really not familiar of how this could lead to World War II, that's okay. That little speech there was for my students that are a little bit more understanding of what happens from World War I to World War II. I will say this. This is not the last time I talk about the Treaty of Versailles. I promise you when we get into World War II, this will come up again. All right, this is a major reason why World War II happens because this treaty that's supposed to end World War I, that was supposed to basically make things peaceful, didn't. Okay, made things worse. It was fine for a short time, but it definitely made things worse. All right, we have one last slide before we do some Regents questions. If we have any, no, we don't have any right now. Okay, so this is the last slide. It's a lot. You got to copy it down, so pause the video if you need. Let's just wrap up the Treaty of Versailles from an American perspective. This is a great example of checks and balances. So we send our president, the leader of our executive branch, is responsible for conducting foreign policy. However, our legislative branch is responsible for negotiating and ratifying treaties. Now, when it's a world war, it's a little complicated because you can't send all 535 members of Congress out to a meeting to meet with other world leaders. So the most logical thing is to send our president, and then basically their president's going to get the treaty and then give it to the legislative branch to vote on. All right. And this is one of those examples where checks and balances comes into play. So even though President Woodrow Wilson created the League of Nations, and even though the House of Reps, okay, we have two houses, they were okay with ratifying the Treaty of Versailles. They got more than 50% approval. The Senate did not ratify the Treaty of Versailles because they disagreed with the punishment for Germany. And if you look back from a historical perspective, the Senate was correct. Okay, the Treaty of Versailles was definitely way too strong-handed on Germany. So basically, because this is a very complicated thing, since we don't recognize the Treaty of Versailles as the official end of World War I, we recognize the armistice as the official end of World War I. So from an American history perspective, the Treaty of Versailles technically doesn't exist for us. This is why, if you remember from the lesson yesterday, this is why on November 11th, we signed the armistice and we celebrate Armistice Day. We didn't celebrate Treaty of Versailles Day. This is really the day that we should celebrate. But we signed the armistice for Armistice Day, and that's why we celebrated it. Okay, so our country technically doesn't recognize the Treaty of Versailles as the official end of World War I. Now, Britain does, France does, Germany does, but we do not. Okay, it was not officially ratified by our country. Okay, so take a look here on the top right. From 1919 to 1941, okay, before World War II, our foreign policy basically turned to isolationism, which is very similar to neutrality, but you're even less involved with foreign countries. So it wasn't necessarily that we just disagreed with the harsh punishments for Germany, but it was also that our country wanted to become more isolated. Okay, if you run an ISO play in high school, basketball, if you're a basketball player, an ISO play is like a one-on-one play, like you're on your own. So let's take a look at this guy. This is Henry Cabot Lodge. He's the Senate Majority Leader. So in the House of Representatives, you have a leader from both political parties, but you're going to have a leader in the House. You have a leader in the Senate. Okay. For the last few years, the leader of the Senate in the United States was Mitch McConnell. Now there's a tie in the Senate. So technically the leader is really Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. They're tied, but the Democrats have power in government, so it goes to Chuck Schumer. So he was the Republican senator who was the leader of the Senate at the time. Now remember, Woodrow Wilson's a Democrat. So very typically when a Democrat wants to do something, okay, and the group of Republicans are against it, this is one of those opportunity times as well. So Senate Majority Leader Henry Cabot Lodge also led a campaign to keep America out of the League of Nations. So it wasn't just staying out of the Treaty of Versailles, it was also to stay out of the League of Nations, as we talked about before. Ultimately, they feared America would get involved in future conflicts if they got involved in the League of Nations, because like when you're involved in other countries' business, that could sometimes lead to you to get into some more problems. So him and his Republican colleagues were very worried about getting into future conflicts for not very good reasons. So he was also very big in keeping America out of the League of Nations. So despite us creating the League of Nations, despite us sending someone to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, neither things really happened. Okay, the Treaty of Versailles was recognized by the world. The League of Nations did happen, but America was not really a part of it, despite having a huge hand in creating it. Like I said, before, it's like creating a business, but then like when the business actually starts, you're nowhere to be found. It's like bizarre. Or like if you were to create a school, okay, if you build a school and then you don't become a principal or you don't become a part of the school, it's like weird. All right, but this is a good example of checks and balances. This is a good example of how our country has to go through not only the executive branch, but the legislative and the judicial branch when it comes to things like this. Okay, and moreover, it's the legislative branch's job to ratify treaties, and this is one of those where they do not allow it to happen. Okay, so you'll see this example not only from in World War I, but just in general government checks and balances examples. Okay, so a little bit of a long lesson, and today's a little bit of a long day. I do apologize. This double period Monday is going to be long. I honestly will not check this for a couple of days, so if you need to spend a little time and turn it in late, I'm really not going to have much of a problem with that. But let's just go through really quick. So you have your reading that you've done. Okay, you have your notes. Okay, so this should be easy. If you've done everything and followed along closely, you have 3 questions on Wilson's 14 points from the reading, and then you're going to answer these questions on the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, you're going to look at, from Germany's perspective, what did the Treaty of Versailles mean for Germany after World War I ended? Okay, you can talk about those particular things. Okay, what was the War Guilt Clause? What did that mean for Germany? What were reparations? What did that mean for Germany? And kind of explain from either the notes or from the reading. And then you have some analysis questions after that. All right. For the second period is going to be long. It's like going to be a real 40-minute lesson. I do apologize, but I think you will like it. Where are we here? So the next thing you're doing is we're starting the Roaring 20s tomorrow, and I'd rather do that live in person, starting a new unit. So what you're going to do is you're going to do a preview video. Now, usually this would be the second lesson of the Roaring 20s, but we're going to make it the first lesson because we're going to front load the information for you. You're going to learn about what prohibition was, okay, and how we had a huge problem in terms of alcohol within our country. So you're going to watch the YouTube video from Oversimplified. Okay, you guys are very familiar with this. This video
was made possible by Honey. Click.
It is 30-something minutes. So it's going to take a while, and you're going to answer the Google Doc questions as it goes on. So this is probably the longest second period assignment you'll have all year, so I do apologize about that. So if you want to take until Wednesday or Thursday to finish it, by all means you can, but obviously it still needs to get done. When you're all done, hit turn in. I'm excited to get back to the regular teaching grind and excited to see you guys tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you live tomorrow. Bye-bye.